Alright guys, it's been ages since I did the last one of these, but I finally found the time. Also, I haven't been doing any creative writing as of late, so yeah. Boring intros are all I got. But I have a quote that I thought of that's proven to be way true this last month, and it says, "The best arguments are those that leave the common man wholly unconvinced." Now I say this for two reasons. One, because most arguments, have really smart people on both sides. And if I told you an argument that makes it obvious the other side is wrong, then it's extremely likely the argument I've told you is a straw man. If the answer is obvious, then smart people wouldn't believe it. But they do, so something's off. If there's one thing I've learned over the last month, it's that I'm not nearly as smart as I think I am. If you think you know why your opponent is wrong, then I almost guarantee you don't. Turns out, just because your argument stumps the uneducated people around you doesn't mean it's irrefutable. Not even close. To sum up my position in a sentence, you don't have to be right to think you're right until you know... you don't have the right to think you're right until you know why the smartest people think you're wrong. If you haven't researched and studied, you don't know what on earth you're talking about. So yeah, that's been a pretty big shift for me because I may have thought myself smarter than I actually am. The other thing I mean to say is by the best arguments leave those the common man wholly unconvinced, is that unless you're really weird, people aren't persuaded by logic alone. Now, I can't say in all cases, but I would class myself as one of those weird people. Yeah, at least I hope I am. However, most people just aren't weird. For most of the population, it takes way more than a good argument to convince someone they're wrong. In my experience, those requirements for a convincing speaker are as follows. 1, charismatic. They sound smart and smooth, unlike someone who stutters and mumbles and stuff, and often, look the part too. 2, they're witty. They have quick comebacks and jokes that makes you laugh. And 3, they're emotionally intelligent. They, quote unquote, speak to your heart, and you can feel the significance of their words. Now, if you're lucky, they also have sound arguments, but that's certainly not a requirement. So seriously, ask yourself next time you were convinced by someone without those qualities, when was that? Well, if ever anyone without those qualities changed their mind. Because in my experience, most people can't remember a time when they were convinced by someone without those qualities. I think truth is like a car. Far too often we choose the model that looks cooler and has the boss paint job instead of actually looking at the engine to see if it's going to get us where we need to go. Now, I'm not saying, you can't have both. There are really persuasive speakers that do present sound arguments, but as a general rule of thumb, the best cars are the ones that have, the worst paint job. You should be wary of an argument that makes you feel, utterly convinced walking away. Anyway, that's my morning ramble. Now on to what's happening. The day after I finished my last Life of email, I went to church with the Myers at Southgate and played some dodgeball after service. It turns out Ben is a beast because he threw a dodgeball and it broke Ben's finger. Granted, patting Ben on the back probably isn't the best response to that sort of thing, but, let's be honest. If you could throw a dodgeball so hard it breaks someone's finger, that's at least a little bit cool. But then we got to give Ben's credit too, because he handled it like a champ. He was just talking and laughing while he cradled his malformed finger. I mean, I've heard breaking a finger really hurts, so yeah. I mean, when I broke Ben's wrist, remember that story? The one where me and Ben were wrestling and I had his wrist and he tried to backflip out my hold. Yeah, it didn't end so well for him. If you ever ask him why he tried that, he'll blame it on the bass drop. Anyway, the point is, I have good reason to believe breaking a bone hurts, but Ben's may look like nothing, so he's got beast points. After that happened, I went home, and then me and Dad set out to get new brake pads, because my brake light on my car keeps coming on, and after paying $60 for the brake pads, we then went through all the work of jacking up the car and the stuff, only to find out they didn't need replacing. In fact, we tried to undo the bolt that held them, and we couldn't do it. So it turns out, even if they did need replacing, we wouldn't have been able to replace them anyway. So it turned out to be a major waste of time. I now have brake pads in my trunk. Hopefully they won't be wasted. And my brake light's still on. Yeah, at this point, I'm just ignoring it. Great policy, right? Who needs brakes? Cuts to a scene of me screaming as my car flies off a cliff. After that, I went to Neo Group, and there was this new girl who was interrogating me on my views on the gifts of the spirit. I mean, it was weird because I'm pretty darn sure she was a feeler, but she wasn't a kind feeler. She had the bluntness of a thinker with the reasons of a feeler, which is a really bad combo. And it just caught me off guard. Plus, I'm not totally decided on where I stand, so I couldn't give her a black and white answer. After that, I stayed at Neo's house into the night and played a game called Fortune Street, which is basically just Wii Monopoly, and I lost. And you know how I feel about losing. The next day was Monday, but school was off. It was off, so that was great. I responded to some emails, and then then a lot of the Myers family came over. We had Seth, Sam, Joe, Benj, and Caleb. And we dug up some old Nerf guns and took them to a nearby park. Then for the next 2 hours, we did Nerf war, which was honestly really great and really fun. We got super thirsty, though, so we came back home after chugging a gallon of water each. We then went to the park and played groundies for the rest of the time. It was fun overall. And then I talked with a friend from New Zealand. School happened the next day, and I did my philosophy homework. So that was, I see, because I was pretty much confused in class. I was learning categorical logic at the moment. Then at lunch, I got to talk with an atheist kid, which was awesome for 2 reasons. 1, because the night before, I had prayed that God would allow me to make a difference at school. And 2, because I utterly beat the kid up intellectually. I mean, I did in, I think, a nice way, but it's pretty clear he didn't have any good refutations for theistic arguments. The best part was, the Thursday before, I had one of the refutations for the fine-tuning argument he gave me, and I thought it was legit, but then I talked over the smart philosophy guy, Matt, who showed me why it didn't work. So I was then able to show the atheist why it didn't work. So yeah, that was cool. Granted, since then he hasn't changed his mind, but, we talk about God at the table, and he's decided it's safer to just listen since then. So at least, I got some intellectual superiority. The thing is, like I touched on before, most people don't believe something because the arguments will be, because of the, they believe they have the arguments because of what they believe. So if he's going to believe God exists, I think he's going to need some heartstrings pulled. But, at least he no longer has the illusion his position is logically correct. Anyway, it was refreshing for me, and I hope at least helpful for the atheist. After that, I played some dodgeball in the gym, and then went to Ratio Christi. Honestly, Ratio Christi's been great. And a few of the people, they're actually know philosophy, so I can debate with them without having to explain what necessary beings are, and that's nice. Right now I'm playing devil's advocate for the best atheistic argument I've ever heard, and they've brought it about to free will, so we kind of have to sidetrack. Anyway, I think that in that session I mostly just listened and sat. The next day I played indoor hockey at school. Well, not very well, granted, but I played. And then I went to youth group where we did this series on identity, and they asked us to write down on cards what our goals were. And of course, I wrote down my goal to not get married, which of course was read in front of everyone. And then of course that led to a mob debate. Yeah, I seem to get into a lot of mob debates. This debate was different though, because it mostly consisted of girls. For some reason, when people hear me say, it's better not to get married, they translate it into it's bad to marry. Then they give me 4 verses showing me it's not bad to marry, and I'm like, yeah, I agree. That's not what I'm claiming. It's like if I said, you can give $10 to the poor, or you can give $10 to the poor, or $20 to the poor. And they're like, it's better. And I'm like, it's better to give $20 to the poor. Obviously, that doesn't mean giving $10 to the poor is bad. It's just better to give 20. Anyway, I think I did very well in the debate. I mean, it's pretty easy on my part, because I just have to literally quote Paul and Jesus. But at one point, even the pastor got involved, so that was fun. Now, if mob debates aren't bad enough, it gets worse when an authority figure joins in. The problem is, if the other side has an authority figure, people are just going to agree with him, even if his arguments are bad. Thankfully, the pastor wasn't one of those persons, and actually reasoned and admitted I had a good biblical case, so things worked out. Anyway, the whole thing persuaded me to write a paper on why I hold the stance I do, and what exactly that stance is. So if any of you want to read it, just ask, and I'll be sure to send it to you. The next day was school again, and I worked out with Caleb. Oh, and then Caleb and I printed this 3D paper airplane. Here's a picture of that. Now, it looks cool, but it doesn't actually work, so at all. It utterly failed, but at least it was good looking. Later that day, I learned that some of my friends I'd been talking to online were coming to town, so it was exciting and terrifying. I didn't know if they wanted me to disclose their names, so I'm going to name their older sister Susanna and another younger one Eve. Anyway, I've known Susanna and Eve for 8 months or something when I joined this writing group called Story Embers a while back. I've basically not even touched this site for months now, actually. Kind of sad. But yeah, almost all the writers on there are feeling girls, so I can't say it's that tragic I'm no longer on there. Oh, and they're homeschooled. Why are all writers homeschooled? So yeah, I've been talking with them ever since I left New Zealand, and honestly, I got to know them pretty well. So when they found out they were coming, I was both nervous and excited. Anyway, it happened that later that night, I got to talk to Matt one-on-one right before he left, which is really unfortunate, I might add. I finally meet this really smart philosopher I've been looking for way too long, and then 2 weeks later, he leaves. Shakes his head. Sometimes life is just disappointing. But we still talk through email, so I guess it's not that bad. Anyway, we had a really good talk, one probably the best I've had in quite a few months, and then I said goodbye and went to bed. The next day was just play boring. After that, on Saturday, the Myers came over, Sam, Seth, and Benj, and we went rollerblading around CSU and stuff. I'll be honest, it was pretty tiring, but in my defense, my rollerblades are trash. Seriously, it's talk about an abused pair of rollerblades. When me and Grace went out rollerblading, she literally just coasts while I'm huffing and puffing to catch up. Yeah, it's all the rollerblades' fault. Anyway, we rollerbladed to a park called Roll and More. Look at that, Roll and More. I just saw that. Then we played groundies at the park, which was fun. We made our way back and stopped at Macca's, where I bought 1 soda, and we refilled 10 times, and I bought everyone cookies. As me and Grace discovered before, you can buy 13 cookies for $4. Granted, they're probably horrible for you, but they taste amazing. Later that night, I met Susanna and Eve for the first time, and it was really awkward. I've never met an online friend before, so that was bad. Then to add to the fact that they're both girls, I know, what was I thinking, right? Of course, meeting girls I never met before in real life would be awkward. And then, to make matters worse, their dad was there the whole time. I mean, I got to hang around with them, and I get why you hung around with them. I see why leaving your daughters alone with a random guy you don't know from the internet may not be the best idea. But it doesn't make it feel any less like you're being judged and watched. Especially because, literally, that was what was occurring. Anyway, if things weren't bad enough, neither Eve nor Susanna said much, so I had to fill the silence void. I made an extremely brief attempt to break the silence through small talk, which, me being me, of course, failed horribly. And in social bankruptcy, I turned to the only thing I knew. Debate. You see, earlier I've been trying to explain to Susanna why God had to abide by the laws of logic. Why is this so hard for people to understand? So I struck with that debate, which of course did not go well. Basically, Susanna and her dad were like, "You're wrong," and then I, in my blunt, inconsiderate way, was like, "No, you're wrong," which of course fostered lots of warm, fuzzy feelings. Meanwhile, Eve, who already been convinced of this subject, I think, was trying to mediate and ask other questions, of course, as one should in a debate. I kind of shut her down so we wouldn't get sidetracked. Basically, here's how to make friends according to my actions. Step 1. Tell feelers they're wrong in an unkind and blunt way. Step 2. Tell someone older than you they don't know what they're talking about. Step 3. Ignore the person who actually wants to learn something. Yeah, needless to say, that did not go over well. From my understanding, Susanna, being an ESFJ, walked away offended and upset. And their dad walked away thinking I was an arrogant, disrespectful know-it-all. And Eve, an ENFJ, walked away feeling neglected. Rubs his temples. Yeah, it was a social nightmare. The worst part was it wasn't even a situation where I could just walk away and be like, well, you majorly messed up, but you'll never see them again, so who cares? Shakes his head at the memory of death. Yeah, anyway, not something I wish to relive. I guess there was a bit of positives. I got to see what it actually looked like. And, Eve drew me this boss picture. Check this out. Like, check that out. That's me in legit armor. Although the only thing I don't quite like is the bow sword. But granted, I didn't explain that well, and it was pretty darn good. Anyway, in case you didn't notice, this picture's now my profile picture. So, yeah, it's boss. Anyway, that was really cool, but the rest of the encounter was questionable at best. Moving on from that unpleasant memory, I then the next day proceeded to write a paper about trying to explain why logic must apply to God in a feeler-friendly terms. So if any of you aren't convinced, let me know, and I will send you that paper. That can help. After I went to Southgate for church, and after church, there was so much small talk, I almost died. Yeah, I didn't stay too long. Oh, and then I went home to discover that there have been literally like a 2-inch long rip in my pants, and no one said anything. I can think of 2 reasons why that might have occurred. 1, people were too embarrassed to tell me, or 2, nobody noticed. I sincerely hope it was the latter. After that, I finished reading the best atheistic argument I've ever read. It's called The Ontological Problem of Evil. I have a paper full of notes and stuff if you want to read it. And I had to read like a 120-page paper to fully understand it. Now, I don't know how many philosophy papers you've read, but they're dry. Like, really dry. Not to mention they're, like, active and constant thinking. Definitely not the top of my quote-unquote enjoyable tasks list. But I survived, and I understand the argument pretty darn well. Anyway, I read this argument and got it depressed, and then went to Neo Group. Unfortunately, Neo Group was not very helpful, as after reading, I got into yet another mob debate. I'm telling you, I get into way too many of these. About emotion, and if it was necessary for salvation. Neo and co. thought it was, and I was arguing it wasn't. After 2 hours of debate, Neo revealed his true feeling core and said something like, look, I can't prove that feeling is necessary for salvation, but I know it is. Shakes his head. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. Anyway, I proceeded to make clear to him that feeling that God required feeling wasn't going to convince me, and we sort of agreed to disagree. However, he did go on a feeler spiel where he articulated that if I wasn't feeling emotions about God, I should be greatly concerned for my salvation. So that was great. May I vent on feeler spiels for a moment? In my experience, these occur only when a teacher or a person in authority is unable to convincingly argue their position. Once they recognize that, they can then change their approach. Once they recognize that, they then change their approach, circumnavigating your arguments and often acting as if your refusal to trust or believe without good arguments is a weakness. They then become very passionate about what they say, sometimes often approaching you as if you're a confused child, and then attempt to convince you using emotion that they're right. Clenches his jaw. I hate feeler spiels. In my view, they're like iocane powder. If you get hit with a big dose of them while you're unaware, you end up like Vicini, dead, or in this case, unconvinced. But once you experience them enough, it's possible to develop an immunity, which I've worked very hard to do. The fact is that these used to work on me, unfortunately, but not anymore. Wipes blue battle paint across his face and climbs atop a rock. For too long the enemy has hemmed us in on all sides. For too long they have used their foul craft of deception to defeat us time and time again. For too long, I say, yet no longer. They may take our wives and children. They may take our lands and homes. They may even take our freedom. But they will never take our freedom! Army erupts in a battle cry and charges against the dark tide. Wipes the battle paint off with a wet rag. I know, quite the inspiring speech. Anyway, the point is, I despise feelers feels, and I have made sure that I'm quite immune to them. The only thing that happened that night was I got to talk to another friend from New Zealand for a bit. The next day was sleep deprived, and I talked to Hal again. For some reason, he's unwilling to accept the fact that, proven by the consensus of the internet, the NASB is a better literal translation than the King James. I'll be honest, he's got some questionable interpretive principles. Like, seriously, he took the verse in 2 Corinthians 12, 2 through 6, that literally says, I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago, whether in the body, I do not know, or out of the body, I do not know, God knows. Such a man was caught up in the third heaven. And I know how such a man, whether caught up in the body or apart from the body, I do not know, God knows, was caught up into paradise and heard inexpressible words, which a man is not permitted to speak. On behalf of such a man I will boast, but on my behalf I will not boast, except in regard to my weakness. He took that to be saying Paul, not someone he knew, was caught up to the third heaven. I mean, seriously, how could you get this from this verse? Shakes his head. Anyway, I have good reason to doubt his interpretive principles. And yeah, we talked about dispensationalism more, and I'm still not convinced. The next day, I had school, I worked out, and then went to Ratchet Christie, where I had a really good debate. I played devil's advocate for the ontological problem of evil, and they semi-won. I say semi because they used privation theory of evil to make an argument I couldn't defeat at the time, but later they agreed that was a bad argument, the privation theory is lame, so they didn't actually beat it. Anyway, still working on that, but maybe they'll come up with something. The point was, I had a really good time with the whole thing. And then later that night, I chatted with my New Zealand friends and was declared unsaved, so that was fun. I had another conversation later where it turned out they were just massively misunderstood me, and I'm still amazed at how quick I was deemed to be a heathen. Anyway, the combination of experiences with Neo and my friends have led me to write a paper on how to lose your salvation in 4 easy steps. So in case any of you want to become excommunicated, I appear to be an expert on the subject. If any of you want to read that, let me know. The next day I had school, and I played indoor hockey again, but this time I scored twice, so that was cool. I drove to Loveland and grabbed some golf frisbees from my Uncle Dusty, who literally has like 50. He scuba dives in ponds where people lose them. Oh, and I watched the movie of death. So, as I was like 1 minute away from home, I got a text from Mr. Myers asking me why I wasn't at the theater. Now, I'm just thoroughly confused, so texting back something along the lines of, what theater? To which Mr. Myers explains the youth group had bought me a ticket to watch this movie, and it was showing in 5 minutes or so. And I'm like, what do you mean? I didn't sign up to go. And he's like, well, we paid for your ticket. So, because I didn't want to waste money, I told him I'd be there. I got home, stuffed my face with spaghetti, and drove to the theater. I barely made it before the movie actually starts, because there's so many previews. I sit down, and I found out what torture feels like. The movie. Oh, that movie. I have not words to describe. It's called Overcomer, and the first thing you know, it's a Christian movie. Now, it's a well-known fact that Christian movies are extremely sucky. Or, they're about one of two things. Sports or crying. This one was about both. I'm not kidding. I have never seen a more emotional movie in my life. If the actors had cried anymore, I think we would have had the next flood on our hands. Forget paying for the movie. I could have been paid to go to that movie. Man, it was death. Shivers at the memory. Anyway, I was very, very happy to get out of that theater. When I was asked why I came and if I hated it so much, I explained that I didn't sign up. Nobody says they added me to the list, but I speculate someone, set me up. They were like, how can I make Alex suffer? And they realized the perfect means by which their despicable plan might come about. And, man, it was horrible. Anyway, I survived that barely, and the next day I had school and worked out with Caleb and all that stuff. I got to know Zach, a guy from school, a bit better, and I lost my wallet and keys and my phone. That was fun. Thankfully, they turned them into lost and found, though they didn't even take the money in my wallet, which was a godsend. But I was pretty nervous there for a sec, because CC isn't really a school known for being morally astute in its character. Anyway, that happened, and then I finally hung out with Colin, if you remember that kid from way back. We played frisbee golf for a few hours, which was pretty fun, and then right at the end, I lost 2 frisbees, which was not fun. After that, we went out and got some food, and I talked to him and got to know him better. He said he doesn't have an opinion on God, and, like every other person I've talked to, definitely didn't like talking about the subject. The next day, I had a history test, played soccer at the school gym, and destroyed, as always, and then proceeded to drive 4 hours up in the mountains with my dad and Ben to go hunting. I spent the first 3 hours listening to Al City's music and remembering. I think that's something we ought to do more, remember. Remember he used to be, what God's done, what you've learned. I highly recommend it. Here's a picture of that drive. And it was good. And then here's a picture of our guns. And we got to our parking space about evening. We grabbed our guns and our backpack and started hiking. At this point, the trip was actually pretty enjoyable. It wasn't very hot. The pack was a bit heavy, but not bad. And the path had some cool foliage, of which here's a picture. But yeah, it was kind of nice at this point. But we hiked for an hour and it eventually got dark. The sun was completely gone by the time we got to the place we needed to cross the little creek that ran beside the trail. And at this point, the wonder of the hike had mostly been lost. And, I had beef jerky. So that was all. I was hungry. Anyway, we found our way across and then found the spot on top of a hill, a big steep hill, mind you, where we set up camp. Here's a picture of the fire. And yeah, I set up the tent, Dad made some food, and we all crashed the night, and got the usual restless backpacking kind of sleep. So yeah, I woke up, and I won't say I was well rested, but I was sufficiently so. Ben and Dad had already gone out hunting. They had big game licenses, I only had a small game. So I hiked down the hill and refilled our water supply. Man, did we come to regret setting up on top of the hill. So much work to get water. I then sterilized it, ate some breakfast, grabbed my 22 to go see if I could find some grouse, which are basically just mountain chickens, but stupider. I know, it's hard to believe something can be stupider than chicken, but it can't. Last time we were up here, I think it was like 6 years ago. I shot like 15 rounds and missed every time. Once even hitting the very branch the grouse was on. And it still didn't move. For some reason, they think if they could just stay still for long enough, you'll suddenly stop seeing them. Anyway, if we can just ignore how bad a shot I was, I hope it's clear why I deem these birds stupider than chickens. So yeah, I wandered around the mountainside looking for grouse and found absolutely nothing. Then, because it turns out we had spotty cell service up there, I got a call from Dad telling me he had a deer and he'd hit it really far away, and he needs me to bring him the game bags and backpacks so we can hike it back down. So I'd say I'd be there as soon as I can and pick up the pace. The only problem is I'm majorly lost. I literally can only see trees, which just about sums up my view. So I try and climb the top of the mountain so I can actually see where I am, but here's what I see. More trees. Now at this point I'm like, forget seeing the forest of the trees. I just want to see anything but the trees. Thankfully, I got some service and was able to find out where I was on the map, and here's basically the path I followed. The blue dot is basically where camp is, which you can't see the blue dot. And the dotted line is point 1, where I started, and it goes to point 2. And I know it looks easy when you see it on the map, but I assure you it was most definitely not easy. It took me like an hour and a half to get back to camp, and I was definitely feeling a bit tired at that point. So yeah, I made it to camp, downed a bottle of water, stuffed my face with trail mix, and then I grabbed all the stuff Dad needed, including another backpack, which I shoved inside the first backpack, filled my water bottle with water again, and then set off for place B. So my backpack and backpack on my shoulders, I began the climb of death. Ever climbed hills while backpacking? Well, I assure you, it's a lot easier without a heavy backpack. Besides that, I still had a good amount of energy, even though I'd already been, running for like 2 hours when Dad called me. So I hit the hill with, like, a power hike. Running was clearly not a feasible option. So I started, and holy cow, it was hard. If it wasn't for the fact I made it a personal challenge to my endurance, then I would have given up or slowed down due to a manifestation of my weakness. Like, it was really hard. I totally would have given up. Seriously, I think it's the hardest hike I've done in my life. You don't know what burning calves feel like, okay, until you've done this. I took a total of 3 breaks, if not out of necessity, out of something very close to it, and finally made it up the hill. When I arrived, I felt like I'd just run a 5K with a backpack on, and holy cow, I was drenched in sweat. Anyway, my body wasn't too happy, but my mind was like slapping my wheels back, being like, Alex, you're a beast, because I didn't give up. So it was mostly worth it. I then got to go a bit of on a downhill, where I finally found Dad, who had been there for like 4 hours, I think. He had gunned the deer and been swarmed by like 1,000 hornets. Oh man, the hornets were everywhere. So he loaded me up with the meat, making the backpack at least twice as heavy as it was before, and I began the horrible trek back. Now this is where something kind of flipped for me. At this point, my body was not liking me. I had already pushed myself way too hard, and my body was being told to go all the way back. And yeah, I did not like that. You know how you can get like your second wind? Well, I'd already used that. Now I'm on my third wind, and it's more like a mild breeze at best. In my experience, when you reach your third wind, you get reincarnated as a zombie who, though definitely dead, walks nonetheless. It was weird. I reached this point of exhaustion where I didn't feel, I just trudged. It just turns out that, walking down a steep hill with a heavy backpack is not easier. It's just hard in a different way. It also turns out that your legs can curse the day you were born. The one thing I did do on my way down is I prayed for like everyone I could think of out from New Zealand just to break up the monotony of my brain death. Anyway, I finally reached camp that afternoon, and man, my hips were sore. Because backpacks put the weight on your hips. I practically crawled up to the campsite and then finally collapsed. I also found out Ben, who had been trying to find me for hours, and I took the water sterilizer with me. So yeah, we both got a drink and got acquainted with the 10 hornets surrounding us at all times. We ade a bit, waited for Dad to get back, and when he finally did, he and Ben made plans to go hunting for one day. Made plans to go hunting one day more before we headed home. At which point, I would say I cracked. Like, up until now, I had a pretty good attitude. Granted, the save couldn't be said for my legs, but my will was doing a pretty good job of keeping my complaints under control. But when I heard that we would have to stay, and I might have to do the whole process again, my attitude stopped being good. In all honesty, it was really hard to get me to have it's really hard to get me to have a bad attitude. Granted, I'm not always, proclaiming sunshines and rainbows, but I'm the kind of guy who does his best with what he's got. You need me to go the extra mile? Sure. Something bad happens? It's alright. I'll move on. But when I heard that, I would say I cracked for the first time in months. Now, granted, it wasn't like breaking out in rage or anything, but I stopped being willing to, count my trials as joy. When asked if I would stay, I said something along the lines of, I will, but you can't make me have a good attitude about it. And in all honesty, that was pretty revealing for me. It's just so rare that I actually get to the place where, I'd actually forgotten I could get upset like that. I just started thinking I was limitless and could actually, pass those limits and never look back. And that fail kind of reminded me that I wasn't. Anyway, it got me thinking, and I wrote a paper about this whole thing, which I honestly think you should read. I don't think we as Christians understand that we aren't and we aren't supposed to be limitless. And it's just because, someone has different limits than you doesn't mean that you're more or less Christian because of that. Anyway, tell me if you want to read it, and I'd be happy to send it to you. So yeah, Dad ended up hiking down with me early and letting me hang out in the village town while he and Ben did the one last hunting day. The trip down was painful in body and spirit. While I thought about my attitude, he left me in town, and we went back. Oh, and they went back and did the hunting spree. The 4 hours or so I was down there were just pretty quiet. A lot of me reflecting and just praying. It was good in a weird way, but also in an empty way. So yeah, while I was down there, I found a bird. Let me get extremely close to it. It may have been a broken bird because I was so close I could have kicked it or something. And there's a picture of that. And yeah, as I was laying on top of the car, I had some random girls ask if I was okay. I just kind of ignored them at first, but they kept asking, so I jerked my head around and was like, yeah, I'm just chilling. See, I meant it to sound cool, but I can promise you it most definitely did not. So yeah, Ben and Dad finally got back. Thankfully, they got nothing. And we drove home, and I crashed in bed at 12. Gosh, I tend to forget about the magic of showers, but man, do I love showers. Anyway, that whole trip sucked, but I think it was actually really good because I learned some things. I was uncomfortable and upset, and I realized just how much I need God again. And yeah, that's always a good thing. The next morning, I wrote 2 papers and then proceeded to Neo's house to play my first round of D&D. And at first, it kind of just felt weird, trying to act out a character and stuff, but despite the fact that I'm actually trash acting, I actually started really to enjoy it. I'm thinking about making some humorous record of my D&D adventures, so if I do that, and you guys like to read it... Oh, if I do that, would you guys like to read it, or does it just sound super lame? Anyway, it was pretty fun. And then afterward, we, and me, a D&D player named Amy, and then Neo and Sydney, played Fortune Street, and I lost again. I'm going to win one of these times. The next day was school, and basically nothing interesting happened. The next day, I played soccer in the gym again, and got absolutely nailed in the face by a ball. It messed up my job for a few days, but it was, good all after that. I also worked out with Caleb, and then went to Ratio Christie, where we had another debate about the ontological problem of evil. I've started doing this thing where I diagram and write everything important that's said on the whiteboard, and it gets really messy. Take a look at this, and tell me if you have a clue what's going on. Oh, that's so clean. Now, if you guys care, I could give you the pictures of the whiteboard after each debate, but I'm not sure how helpful that'd be, so that's up to you. The next day, I loaded up with my history homework, and then later that day, people from New Zealand called me, and after talking it through, declared I was saved again, so that was nice. I also went to youth group that evening, had a good conversation with Joe about emotion, and why it's not helpful to feel the emotion when you're trying to counsel someone. The next day was school again, worked out with Caleb, and then I got hired. Yeah, it turns out that there's this opening at the place where Mom and Ben used to work, so I met the boss lady, and we talked, and she hired me. I get paid 50 cents better than King Soopers, so not really a step up there, but the real perk is a manufacturing job. We make jewelry, which means I don't have to talk to people all day. If there's one thing King Soopers taught me, it's I'm not a people person. I can do it, and I can ask, how's your day going 1,000 times a day, and always get the exact same response, but it majorly drains me. In this job, it's way better, because I can just put in earbuds and listen to a podcast for 4 hours. Right now, I'm listening to this Catholic podcast about St. Thomas Aquinas from a Catholic point of view, and it's been really good. Not only have I learned a few cool philosophy things, but I'm realizing just how majorly I misunderstand the Catholic faith. Granted, some things they believe, especially about the Virgin Mary, are questionable, but a lot of things actually have pretty good biblical justification. Praying to saints, relics, the Eucharist, to name a few. Not saying I believe it, but I'm definitely going to come up with better refutations if I want to say I don't. So if anyone wants to know more about Catholic dogma, just let me ask, because I'm a semi-expert now. I've listened to this podcast for 30 hours now. Anyway, I got hired, and then I drove out to London and talked with Jessie. You may know her as the ID lady, about intelligent design and evolution. So far, she's got me convinced that naturalistic evolution is false. It's just way too improbable to be a viable option. Thus, I'm technically an ID proponent. But as for common descent, flat-out creation, and her weird module theory, yeah, I'm not so sure. We're still going to have to search that one out. But I think I'm going to try and write a paper about why materialistic worldview can't account for evolution. On a side note, Jessie is a self-professed INFP, and I was like, no way, because she's so smart, right? But I had her take the cognitive function test, and sure enough, she was actually an INFP. You see, I always knew failures could be study smart, when they read a bunch of books or something like that, and they're smart because they study smart people. But I didn't think they could be like intuitively smart like thinkers, where you could just, think of something totally outside the box. But yeah, it turns out that with enough hard work and introspection, even feelers can be intuitively smart. The other thing is INFPs tend to, know how to improve themselves, but often fail to have the diligence to do so. And that's why I think I hadn't seen an INFP like her before. All the INFPs I know are pretty young. But yeah, she's proven my prejudice wrong, which was both cool and annoying. The other thing I did that day was I built the first Bionicle I built in years. It was a cool experience, a bit of a blast from the past, Also, this Bionicle has a custom head and armor, which doesn't seem very impressive unless you've actually tried to build your own Bionicle with a custom head and armor. And for all of you that have no idea what I'm talking about, I'll just let you know, it's very hard to make anything that looks as cool as this, so I'm pretty proud of this guy. The next day, I went to the Wade's cabin. Remember that place where I did the airsoft war in the snow? And then got hit from across the entire lake? Stupid lucky shot. Anyway, we went up and I bought my new bow so we could shoot targets. And my bow is still pretty messed up. Its draw weight is really darn heavy and its draw length is too long, so I didn't end up using it much. But they did have a recurve bow just sitting around, so that was so much fun. I shot a longbow in New Zealand, and that's why I decided to like bows. But I don't know. Like, compound bows just aren't as much fun. When I got to shoot the recurve, though, that reminded me of why I liked archery so much. It was great. Granted, I utterly failed in comparison to David and Sam's compound bows, but it was still really fun. We had a half-point disability, so David only got half the points that the targets he hit were actually work, and he still won. That's vexing. Anyway, here's a picture of the target and where we were shooting from. And now we're not going to talk about that. We're not going to talk about how far back that was, because I actually shot those. When I actually shot those inaccurately placed arrows. But I will say, I did actually get quite a bit better at the end of it. Because I figured out that 1, if you aim before you draw back, that helps accuracy a lot. And 2, you don't want to roll the string off your fingers. You want it to be like at the very tip so you get a smooth release. Anyway, the point is I got better and started shooting about as well as I did in the picture, but from like 10 yards further back. So I thought that was pretty cool. Anyway, that was fun. Basically, all we did was shoot for like 4 hours straight. I just got really tired. And then we drove home, or down to town to get food at a restaurant. Here's a pic of the sunset as we were driving down. I was in the car with Grace and Isla, and I think I experienced girl talk for the first time. It was a disturbing amount of times that a girl can put the word like in a sentence. Shivers. Anyway, I was glad that I got out of that car and got to eat. After we had eaten, the Wades went back to their cabin and we went home. The only problem is that I thought we were going back, so I left my stuff up there, unfortunately. The next day, I went to church with the Myers, experienced a small talk after church, which was lovely. Some hypothetical about Joe faking he hadn't graduated from high school, so he'd go to prom at CEC. The thing that lost me, though, was I definitely couldn't see the cons. Oh, I could definitely see the cons, but I couldn't see the pros, of Joe faking he was in high school going to CEC. Anyway, I did that. I played D&D at Neo's house, and then we did Bible study, and we stayed late into the night playing video games with him. And I stayed late into the night playing games with him, which I actually do consider worth my time. The next day I had school and work. My boss, Michael, wasn't there, so they sent me to the jewelry department where I just did all the stickers on all the things and cards. You have no idea how many stickers I stuck. Hugs his knees and rocks back and forth in the closet. So many stickers. The next day I reconnected with Josiah, the evolutionary creationist kid, and we went to Kane's and I talked about open theism. He's an open theist. And that was really good. And then after that I rollerbladed to Vashon Christie, where Jesse gave me a very informative talk about evolution. We didn't get around to discussing the ontological problem of evil because I shared my paper on why I didn't believe free will exists with Alan, Jesse's husband, not wife, who's a hobbyist philosopher, still smarter than me though. And we began debating that. Of course, the question got to metaphysics, as it always does, and unfortunately we were cut short. Here's the chicken scratch we produced, and I'll put it in the order of our conversation in case there's a 1% chance you can understand what's going on. Anyway, it was definitely a good conversation. I wish we could have finished it. The next day consisted of more school and soccer in the gym. Guess who dominated? And then I went to youth group, which was, well, mostly uneventful. The day after that, I maxed out with Caleb, and it turns out both of us can bench press 145 pounds, which I think is pretty good. I messed up something when trying to deadlift my max, though. I don't know what. Then I played indoor hockey and got hit in the face with a ball. Now that was fun. And lastly, I eavesdropped on a conversation. Well, they were practically yelling, so I don't know if it counts as eavesdropping. Where some random high school girls decided that they wanted to apply for jobs based on how it would make them smell. Is this something girls actually consider? Which I found just bizarre. The next day was more school, and I played basketball in the gym. I'm not very good at basketball, so that was meh. And then I had another round of sticker suicides at work. Seriously, so many stickers. And then later that night, I went rollerblading with Grace. We went to this indoor hockey rink where there's a water ball on the ground. So we played roller hockey with a water bottle. I wasn't going easy, and she actually won the first 2 rounds. Of course, I couldn't let my little sister beat me, so I started playing a bit smarter and won the next 3, which means I won in the long run. So ha! Take that, Grace. Anyway, that was fun. The next day consisted of me sleeping in and spending like the whole day writing this live demo, except for a brief interval of checkers, which I played with Grandpa, who came over. And I won the first game and barely tied the second. I also watched Spider-Man Far From Home with the fam. And finally, that brings me to today, where I finished this email. Gosh, that was long. But then again, it's been like a month since I wrote my last one. Anyway, hope you guys are doing well, and if you find the time, let me know what's happening in your life, and I will talk later.